September. What did I read? Today's video is going to be a pretty simple one. I'm just going to talk about some books that I read in September. I did not start all of these books in September, but I did finish most of them in September, except for one. I'm probably not going to make this like a monthly series just because I'm not going to speedrun books. That takes away from enjoying it, and that just doesn't sound like fun to me. Anyways, I have 6 books to talk about today. Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. First of all, this title is a mouthful, dude. I keep wanting to call it Hard-Boiled Egg. There's a really cool cover that I feel like really matches the vibe of the book. It's not too long either. It's about 400 pages. This book was written by Haruki Murakami in 1980. This is my 4th Murakami book now. So the book is pretty much about this guy who is a data processor. Even after reading this entire thing, I still don't really understand what that means. And he works for this mysterious company who has him go to work with a doctor dude in a cave. But on top of that story is another story that switches off every chapter with the other one about a dude who's in this weird wall town that has unicorns and people who remove their shadows. And in that world, a shadow is kind of like your personality, and if your shadow is removed, you're a soulless husk of a person. That's pretty much as I want to give you about this book. I'll try to go into this blind. I wouldn't recommend this for people. This is your first Murakami book. I would probably start off with something that's a little less convoluted than this one, but if you read Murakami before, I easily recommend this to you. This book is fantastic. The characters on here are super interesting. There isn't a single weak character in this. There's a couple plot points that just kind of went nowhere, which usually happens in Murakami books. The 2 stories eventually do intersect. At first, I didn't really know where he was going with those 2 things, but halfway through the book, you're gonna see the ending coming. It's not that difficult, but I'm not gonna spoil it for you. Just go in blind. Of course, this has another Murakami mid-ending. Like all of his books, I didn't like the ending. But to be fair, I did tell my girlfriend about it. I just spoiled it for her because she wasn't planning on reading it. And she seemed to like the ending, so I could just be a crybaby. So maybe you will like the ending. Overall though, I love this book. I'm definitely going to keep reading a lot more Murakami books, and eventually I do want to try to make like maybe a tier list video, but just something where I can talk about all the books because I do want to finish reading all of his books at some point. The Picture of Dorian Gray. This was written by Oscar Wilde in 1890. So the book is about this dude named Dorian Gray. He gets his painting done by an artist named Basil, and while Basil is painting him, this annoying dude named Henry comes through and just nagging Dorian. Is like, oh, you know, your painting will stay young and beautiful forever, and you're gonna grow old, and you know, you're gonna become ugly essentially. And Dorian takes this to heart, and he comes back home and he's like, oh please, like let me be the painting and let the painting get old. So essentially he's just switching places with the painting. The idea of the book was pretty interesting to me. Like, okay, that sounds like a cool plot, but the way the book was written, the characters, the plot, I just didn't like it. I get that this is a classic, but I didn't enjoy reading this thing. I really struggled trying to finish this book. This is one of the few books that I had to go from like an actual paperback edition to just buying the audiobook, just so I can force myself to listen to the book. Another complaint I have, this isn't the fault of the author, but this edition of the book, look at this. It reads like a manifesto. This thing has the tiniest little words, dude. I thought this was going to be like a quick short story. I was like, oh, okay, 100 pages. That's not too bad, but each one of these pages is like 3 pages, or maybe not 3, but each one of these is like 2 or 3 pages of a normal book. So yeah, I ended up getting this on Audible and finishing it that way, but I just didn't like the book. There's a couple quotes in the book that I was like, okay, that's kind of cool, just because I recognize them from Jay-Z songs. Yeah, Dorian is an asshole. Harry is an asshole. Basil is just kind of stupid. I get the book is over 100 years old now, so the writing is obviously not going to be for someone like me who speaks modern day English. I've read classics from this time period too, and I enjoyed them. So I don't know, just something about the way Oscar Wilde writes. I didn't enjoy it. I really found this book to be boring. All of chapter 11, I would just skip. It just goes on and on and on about him describing random shit in his house. I was sitting there at this coffee shop and I was listening to the Audible on my headphones, and he was just describing the shawl from the finest silks of the Orient, laced with gold and auburn butterflies, while sitting in a divan of purplish color up. That shit was boring. So boring. The message behind the book is pretty interesting, but outside of the core message of the book, as just entertaining as like a piece of fiction, I was bored. But as a message behind it, yeah, it's cool. Do I regret reading this? No, not at all. I'm happy I got it out the way. You know, this is a book that I've been wanting to read for a while. It's because it is so highly recommended. Would I read it again? No. Would I recommend it to you? I don't know. I mean, I don't know who to recommend this book for. If you're someone who's like me, no. If you're someone who is really into classics, maybe you'll like this. I don't know. I mean, if you have a different opinion on this and you want to try to sell this to me, please Tell me. If you feel like, oh, you just didn't get it, bro, you didn't get the deeper message, bro, please tell me if you really think that way. Explain to me why you enjoyed this book if you're someone who does. But for me personally, I'm good. Piranesi. Now, this book was written by Susanna Clark in 2020. So this book is about a dude named Piranesi. When I first picked up the book, I thought Piranesi was going to be the guy on the cover, but it's not. He lives in this weird world of endless labyrinth halls, filled with statues and ocean tides. Now, before you read this book, I'd probably look up what the word vestibule means. I had never heard it before this book. I've heard the Spanish word, but I've never heard it in English before. So I definitely would recommend, if you've never heard that word either, look up what it means, because that word gets mentioned every other sentence in this book. I would go into this thing knowing nothing. That's it. That bare bones summary plot I told you, that's all you should know about this book. This book is better if you experience it knowing nothing. It's super short. It's only 200 pages, so you can probably get it done within a couple of days, really enjoy it. I read this thing on the plane and I managed to finish it. And the mystery just unravels so fast. I did see the ending coming from a while far away. Not because the book didn't have an interesting mystery. The mystery was interesting. I just feel like it's kind of obvious what's happening, but I mean, it's still really good. Still a really good story. I did read the physical edition of the book. I just don't have it right now because I loaned it out to my girlfriend. But the book has a really cool cover too that I like. They also just recently announced that the movie is going to get animated by the same studio that did Coraline and Box Trolls. That should be good. Those guys have made some really good movies. Coraline is a fantastic film. Box Trolls is a fantastic movie. Definitely an underrated movie if you've never seen it. I'm really curious to see what art direction they're going to try to take the book in. Curious to see what they'll do with it. If they'll make a stop motion like their other movies. I just don't know how it'll work, but I definitely think this studio is a good studio and they make pretty good stuff. I'm excited to see how it'll turn out. I definitely want to check out some more books from this author at some point too. I threw on her book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, on my list of books to read just because everyone online said if you like Piranesi, you'd really like that book. It's set in a time period that I'm not really a fan of, but I'll still definitely give it a shot because I enjoyed this book and I think I'll enjoy some of her other works. So yeah, man, I would recommend Piranesi to pretty much anybody who knows how to read.
One full page of a Harry Potter book.
It's a fantastic book and I can't wait for the movie. The Psychology of Money and How to Get Rich. The Psychology of Money was written by Morgan Housel in 2020. This is another finance book. There's not really much to say about it. I listened to it on Audible. I usually just listen to any like those kind of finance or lifestyle books on Audible just because I don't want to read them. I just treat them as like a long, interesting podcast. I enjoyed listening to this one. It wasn't too long. It was about 6 hours. I listened to it while I was at work. There were some interesting ideas in it. I don't get all the hype because I saw like every single finance bro online recommends the book. And that's why I read it. I'm like, okay, I'll check it out, see if it's any good. And it's good. Will it change your life? Probably not. But it's good. If you have an extra credit on Audible and you have a spare 6 hours, why not? How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. I also listened to this one on Audible. And this book was actually pretty entertaining. Just outside of like the whole finance realm, I just enjoyed reading about his life and his philosophy and how he views the world and how he went about making his business. And the book was pretty funny. I was listening to this book while just doing my walks and it made me chuckle out loud a couple times just because the author was he seemed like a funny guy. The book was kind of weird to listen to because I normally look up the author before I read a book. And he died a couple years ago, and in the book he's constantly talking about mortality and death and how he's kind of afraid to die, and it's just weird to listen to, like, oh shit. Hear his perspective on death, and he's been dead now for a couple of years. Just kind of odd, but it was still a really good read. And he died pretty young too. He was only like 67, which I mean is relative, right? But I mean 67 is still kind of young to die as a billionaire. The book is really interesting to see this guy's perspective on life and money and starting a business. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten rich yet since reading the book, but we'll see. But yeah, I had a good time listening to it on Audible, and they don't sponsor me. I wish they would. It was a good book. I'd recommend this one to pretty much anybody. It's just an enjoyable read. The 100 Years' War on Palestine, written by Rashid Khalid in 2020. So this book is essentially about the history of the Palestine conflict since 1917 to 2017. The book is broken up into 6 distinct parts, which the author calls declarations of war. And it also has a pretty good intro to just give you a quick summary and a conclusion where the author gives his perspective on what he believes could solve all the problems that are happening out there right now. This book was pretty interesting to read just from a history standpoint. The author writes using first person throughout most of the book. He has a lot of family ties. His uncle was the mayor of Jerusalem at one point, so he has a close connection to that land. And he provides all his sources that he claims in the book in the back. And you can look it up yourself if you want to go deeper into it and figure out what he's even talking about. The book is, of course, biased. I mean, even me, I'm going to be biased on this issue, but it is still very interesting to see how this conflict is looked at from the Palestinian perspective. And it's especially good for people who are just curious on what's happening over there. I do feel like a lot of us here don't understand what's happening out there. And obviously this one book isn't going to teach you every single thing you need to know. and of course it has its biases, but it's still a fantastic read. It's a good starting point for people who are just curious about what's happening out there. Overall, I had a good time reading it. There's a lot of good supplemental lectures online from the author if you were curious. I enjoy reading history books, especially when they're from a perspective of a specific people, so if you're someone who's like that as well, then you would enjoy this. Thank you for watching the video. This is probably not going to be a monthly series because, like I said in the beginning, I just don't want to rush reading books. I enjoy reading books and I don't want to make it a job or something. But maybe I'll try to do one every other month. I'm averaging like 2-3 books a month, so 6 books a video is not bad, I would say. If you have any good book recommendations or you disagree with anything I said about the books I talked about today, just let me know in the comments, man. I'm always down to talk about stuff. Thank you.